I was 16 when I spent my first night completely alone in the house. My parents had to leave town for an emergency business trip, and my older sister was away at college, so I was left with the old family home all to myself for the first time in my life. At first, it felt like an exciting kind of freedom. The silence was comforting, the familiar creaks and groans of the wooden floors like old friends. I lounged around, watching TV, snacking on junk food and texting friends. But as the night crept in and the clock ticked closer to midnight, an eerie feeling began to settle over the house. It started with the quiet. The usual background noise seemed to vanish, replaced by an unnatural stillness, as if the world had paused just beyond my walls. That's when I heard it, faint whispering coming from the large front window that looked out onto the street. It was so soft I thought maybe it was just the wind at first or some animal outside, but the whispers slowly became clearer, almost like words spoken in a low, hurried voice. My heart pounded as I sat frozen on the couch, straining to understand what was being said. It sounded like pleading, like someone begging for help, but I couldn't make out the exact words. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, but then the whispers abruptly stopped, replaced by an intense silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement, a shadow flickering just outside the window. I jerked my head around, but the street was empty. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly approached the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek out, but there was no one there. I closed the curtains and locked every door and window with trembling hands. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I grabbed my phone and called my parents, but there was no answer. Panic rising, I called the police. When they arrived, they searched the entire neighborhood but found nothing unusual. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no one lurking around. The officers told me sometimes these things happen, but they couldn't explain the whispering or the shadow. The next morning, a neighbor stopped by and told me a chilling story. For the past few weeks, a strange man had been seen wandering the neighborhood at night, going door to door, asking if anyone was home. He was never caught or identified, and some neighbors had even called the police before, but he always vanished without a trace. After hearing that, a cold wave of dread washed over me. I realized those whispers were a warning. He was watching, waiting for someone to be home alone, and that night, it was me. Every time I think back to that night, I remember the silence after the whispers stopped, a silence that felt alive, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what might come next. From then on, whenever I'm home alone, I find myself checking the windows again and again, listening for whispers in the dark, haunted by the feeling that the shadow might still be out there, lurking just beyond the glass, waiting for the next night I'm left alone. It was a typical Friday night, and I was home alone for the first time in weeks. My parents had gone out for dinner with friends, leaving me with the house to myself. I was curled up on the couch, binge-watching a new series I'd been obsessed with, the glow from the TV casting eerie shadows across the dimly lit living room. The house was quiet, peaceful, or so I thought. About an hour into the show, I heard it. Slow, heavy footsteps coming from the hallway upstairs. At first I thought it was just the house settling, maybe a branch scraping against the roof, but those footsteps were deliberate, steady, and unmistakably human. My skin prickled with fear. The footsteps stopped just outside my bedroom door, then retreated slowly back down the hallway, each step echoing in the silence. I froze, gripping the blanket tighter around me, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I tried to call my parents, but the call went straight to voicemail. Panic started to build. I grabbed my phone and flashlight, summoning all my courage, and slowly made my way to the stairs. The wooden steps creaked beneath my feet, and as I reached the landing, the silence felt suffocating. I checked every room, the bathroom, my parents' bedroom, the guest room, all empty. But then I noticed something chilling on the carpet. By the stairs, muddy footprints leading from the back door across the hallway and toward the stairs. The back door was supposed to be locked, and I was sure I hadn't heard it open. My heart raced as I realized someone had been inside my home, right there while I was downstairs. I called the police immediately. They arrived quickly, questioning neighbors and searching the property, but found no sign of the intruder. The officer told me the prints suggested someone had tried to break in, but fled when the alarm went off. I hadn't even realized the alarm was armed. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows made me jump. I kept hearing those footsteps in my mind, slow, heavy, deliberate, as if the intruder was still upstairs, waiting, watching, just out of sight. From then on, the house never felt safe when I was alone, and every time I climbed those stairs, I half expected to see someone lurking in the shadows, ready to come down after me. Growing up, our basement was always off limits, not because of any rule from my parents, but because of an unspoken fear that settled over the house every time we talked about it. One night, when I was about 14 and home alone, that fear came rushing back in the worst way possible. I was in the kitchen making a late-night snack when I heard a strange noise from downstairs, a soft scraping sound, like something dragging across the concrete floor. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the old pipes or the furnace kicking in, but the sound kept coming, growing louder and more persistent. I decided to investigate, my heart pounding as I crept down the stairs. When I reached the bottom, I saw the basement door. The heavy, rusted metal one that was always locked was slightly ajar. I'd never seen it open before. Fear rooted me to the spot, but curiosity pushed me forward. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pushed the door open further. The basement was pitch black, cold air swirling around me, carrying a faint metallic smell. As I shone my flashlight around, I saw deep scratches gouged into the wooden walls and strange symbols drawn in what looked like dried blood on the floor. Suddenly I heard whispering, low, unintelligible voices coming from the darkness beyond. I spun around, heart racing, and ran back upstairs, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it tightly and called my parents, but they brushed it off, saying it was probably just a raccoon or the furnace acting up. But I knew better. That night I barely slept, imagining whatever had been down there, waiting, watching. Years later, when we finally sold the house, the new owners discovered that the basement had been used for dark rituals by a previous occupant. Whatever I heard that night wasn't the wind or pipes. It was something far worse, something that wanted to stay locked away in the dark. One summer evening when I was about 13, I found myself completely alone in the house for the first time. My parents had gone out to a late-night event, leaving me with the old family home and the warm, sticky night air hanging thick through the open windows. It was one of those nights when even the slightest sound feels amplified. A creak, a sigh, the rustle of leaves. I was sitting in my room, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, trying to distract myself from the uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. That's when I first noticed it. A faint sound, soft and steady, that didn't quite fit. It was breathing. At first I thought maybe it was my own, or perhaps the house settling in the heat. But the breathing was too deliberate, too measured. And it wasn't coming from inside my room. It was coming from just outside my window. My heart hammered in my chest as I strained to listen. The slow inhale and exhale continued, steady and unyielding, as if someone was standing there waiting. I was frozen, torn between fear and the desperate urge to see who or what was out there. Slowly, almost against my will, I inched closer to the window and peeked through the blinds. For a moment, all I could see was the dark expanse of the backyard, illuminated only by the faint, flickering glow of distant streetlights. Then, movement. A shadow shifted beyond the garden fence, tall, still, and silent. The figure was impossibly still, as if watching, waiting for something. I couldn't see any features, only a black silhouette blending into the night. My throat went dry, and I slammed the window shut, locking it tight. But the breathing didn't stop. It seemed to circle the house, drifting from one window to the next, always just out of sight. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of the night, and every shadow seemed to take on a sinister life of its own. I grabbed my phone to call my parents, but the call went unanswered. Then, the battery died, plunging me into total silence. and darkness except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I sat there frozen and terrified as the breathing crept closer, louder, then receded again, like the unseen visitor was toying with me, a predator playing with its prey. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I never dared to look outside again that night. When my parents finally returned early the next morning, the visitor was gone. No footprints, no signs of anyone lurking. But the sense of being watched stayed with me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there, hidden in the shadows, breathing and waiting. To this day, I don't know if it was a person, some twisted stranger, or something darker, something not quite human. All I know is that on that long, sleepless night, I felt the chilling presence of someone, or something, watching me just beyond the glass. It was a rainy Tuesday night when I first noticed the calls. I was home alone, my parents working late shifts, and the storm outside made the house feel even lonelier than usual. I was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to focus on a movie, but the sound of the rain tapping against the windows was constant and unsettling. Then the phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I hesitated but answered anyway. Silence. Just heavy breathing on the other end. I thought it might be a prank call and hung up, but then it rang again and again. Every time I picked up, nothing but silence except for that slow, heavy breathing that sent chills down my spine. I tried calling back the number, but it was disconnected. Over the next hour, the calls kept coming, always the same. No voice, no words, just breath. Then I heard it. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, pacing outside my front door. I looked through the peephole but saw no one. My hands shook as I locked all the doors and windows, but the calls didn't stop. The breathing on the phone grew heavier, deeper, almost like someone was right there watching me. Panic set in. I called the police, but with no evidence of anyone. Outside, they said they'd patrol the area and advised me to stay safe inside. The calls stopped only when the storm passed hours later, but the fear lingered long after. Weeks later, my neighbor told me about a man who'd been arrested nearby for stalking and making silent, creepy phone calls to his victims, always breathing, never speaking. I still don't know if it was him, or if whoever it was had been standing right outside my door that night, listening and waiting in the dark.